Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Speaking of joining us from, for our second of a two-week part series, Jeff Reichard, welcome back to Veeam Industry Insights.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Jason.
So, please start piling in with where you're from and also any questions you have. Now, last week we were talking a lot about industry regulations in the more traditional sense. Jeff, we brought you back this week to talk about something a little bit more specific. So when we talked last week, one of the things I really enjoyed about the conversation was we talked about how regulations are often put in place to kind of mandate the kinds of things that really, if you're doing responsible IT, you ought to be doing anyway. Right. And we talked about that from the premise of industries. We talked about it from the premise of certain geographies. But if you're going to talk about an IT, things that you ought to be doing, arguably cyber preparedness is beyond number one as ought to be doing most often. And that also comes with some regulation mandates, doesn't it?
Well, especially in 2022, nothing could be more the case than that. Jason, you and I are data center guys from way back. We are used to, in our own data center, with customers that we talk to, dealing with security mandates exactly like you described, or compliance mandates. I work in pharma, I work in biotech, I work in financial services or trading commodities or trading stocks. And so there are certain ways I've got to design my DR strategy, my data protection and high availability strategy around that. Those lines are getting really blurred nowadays, though. There's a lot that's changed.
So, and one of the things I think that what doesn't change, maybe that's a better way to say that, is arguably one of the banes of everyone's existence is whenever you're asked to do something that you probably ought to do anyway, but you don't have enough bandwidth for it, you don't have enough budget for it. Typically what happens is it becomes almost a checkbox. Are you doing this or not? In the case of cyber, it seems like there's a lot more to it than that. Now, one of the things that you've been looking at is RFPs and the processes on which organizations validate cyber preparedness. Do you have something you want to show for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this slide, this statistic comes from ACA Group, which is a global risk management and compliance advising group, consulting group that consults to the financial services industry. What struck me looking at this quote from 2021, when they interviewed financial services firms, and they did over 1,600 worldwide, and asked them, hey, what are you running into? What's the landscape around compliance out there like? 44% of the firms that they talked to reported that one of the compliance burdens they're bearing isn't their in-country regulators or general, GDPR or US-based privacy regs or anything like that. It's their own customers saying, the cost of doing business with us is that you have to prove to us that you've got good cybersecurity. And what's interesting about this is, honestly, this stat, 44%, when ACA Group does this survey, and they do it every year, when they do it again this year, I guarantee you the number is going to be astronomically higher. I would guess, and Jason, I think you've probably been involved in some of these conversations here at Veeam. We at Veeam get asked the same kind of information. And I bet every single customer that's on the call today, whatever your geo is, your firm is being asked for the same kind of guarantees by your customers.
Yeah, when you first see this stat, it's like, really, 44% asked for cybersecurity? That seems so specific. But if we're honest about it, for the last several years, in fact, Jeff, I can remember back, 15, 20 years ago when you and I were first working with each other, and DoD had mandates around COOP, and SEC had mandates around how durable were services going to be. It's been over 20 years where organizations have said the cost of doing business is, do you have a BCDR plan? In my mind, this just kind of puts a little bit of a different hue on that same kind of conversation, because if I have an expectation of BCDR across my organization and my point of failure is that some source of data or subcontract, they're not resilient, well, it doesn't matter whether it's them or me. Bottom line is my processes don't continue. It feels like this is that same kind of thing, especially as we start thinking about B2B and data transfer. Cyber becomes even more precarious, doesn't it?
So perfect intro. ACA Group in this survey that they put out identified 4 drivers that are making good cyber risk management for any kind of organization, whether you're financial services or whatever you do, much more critical. And the first item on the list is the increasing amount of regulations that everyone is faced with. And their point was, you may not be a government entity, right? Like you just said, Jason, but if you're giving goods or services to the government, then their regulatory requirements flow down to you. It's exactly the same, right? So because we're all interconnected, the latest stat that I heard, and this was around the cybersecurity maturity model certification, which has gone through version 1 for US federal, and we're looking at version 2. It just got announced, and we're going to know more specifically what's in it soon. But that's all around supply chain security. And the latest stat that I heard is that there are 300,000 companies in the defense industrial base, that is, that sell goods or services to the US Department of Defense. That's a lot of companies that are being affected by cyber readiness mandates. It's a big number.
That's really impressive. But again, I mean, if you go back to what is their mission, and their mission has to be durable, doesn't matter causality. If you're down, they're encumbered, and that's not okay.
Yeah, exactly. The other 3 items that the ACA group pointed out in that survey that I found interesting, and these are, what's going to be a challenge for people going forward in 2022. Item number 2 on the list, which is the same, Jason, as I know we hear in the Data Protection Trends Report, is resource limitations. Yeah. Cyber isn't easy. You may not have the people on the staff that you need to do it. You may not have already received the budget that you need to do it. So resource limitations is going to be a burden. The other things they talked about are also, really interesting in this context. They call out specifically global economic and political instability. If you look at the latest stats around ransomware, and we'll be talking more about that in a minute, but it's not just criminal gangs that are doing this, right? It's nation state actors that are involved in this at this point.
Yeah, on the resource limitation side, Dave Russell and I have talked about this a lot when we look at the shifts driving data or IT modernization and digital transformation. Depending on your favorite analyst firm, whether you like IDC or Gartner or Forrester, et cetera, most of the stats fall in the range of somewhere between 68 and 82% of budget and manpower is usually maintaining just the status quo. Right? That doesn't give you even much headroom for actually developing new primary technologies, and more things would actually affect the production environment, much less how to protect both the legacy and the ongoing. So certainly I can see where resource limitation becomes an encumbrance. But you know what you also don't have the resources to do? Fix a cyber attack. If you don't think you have the preparedness to or the resources to prepare, try trying to remediate. Okay, before we go on to your next point, though, let's find out where folks are coming from this morning. And also, please feel free to keep weighing in on questions that you might have around either cyber and or governmental or industry regulations. Okay, so let's look at the U.S. map to start with. So it looks like California's in the house. It's a little bit early for them, so thanks for joining. I see Colorado. Of course, I'm from the great state of Texas. We see Ohio. Our producer is in Georgia. Let's see, what do we got?
Massachusetts and Connecticut.
There you go. I'm assuming you're checking in for all your Connecticut homies.
That would be right. Yep.
All right. And how about overseas? What are we looking at? India's in the house. So good morning over there as well. And of course, and then social media is out of Romania as well. So or Bucharest, excuse me. Okay, so let's kind of double click in a little bit more. So we talked about regulations and where that fits. When we talk about remediation, one of the things I just made the joke about how you may not have the resources for it. One of the ways that you might be able to get resources for remediation comes in the form of cyber insurance. And can you actually insure your organization in order to get some kinds of resources to remediate for that? Now, this has been a really squishy topic that you've actually watched for a couple of years now, haven't you?
I have, and it's getting a lot of press lately. We have customers at Veeam, and many of our hardware partners have customers that have come to them asking for immutability. And if you've been on the various talks that we have here on LinkedIn Live, you've heard the term immutability from Veeam before. We've got a lot of capabilities around making sure that when you take your backup data, even if a bad guy's on your network for a long time and compromises admin credentials, that the bad guy can't delete your backups. Well, We recognize that as a best practice, and insurance companies increasingly are recognizing it as a best practice too. We've been hearing here at Veeam for over a year now, customers coming to us saying, what can you tell us for immutability? Because our insurance is going to get canceled. What's kind of amazing, Jason, in the last year is how the pace of that has accelerated. It's really, really been nutty in the past year, what we've seen.
So one of the things I struggle with when we talk about the concept of immutability, and maybe this goes back to supply chain and where the data comes from along the way, I'm not sure I quite understand what all can you actually insure? Where does that coverage happen? Because it just seems like there's so many things. Coverage has got to be really daunting even to prove.
So back in the early days of cyber insurance was frequently covered under a company's general property liability policy, right? I mean, the liability policy that they had that covers if somebody slips and falls or the building burns down or whatever, would also cover cyber. It began to get a lot more specialized, in particular after the NotPetya attack that caused over $10 billion worth of damages in 2017, and put a lot of insurance policies in court, a lot of companies in court with their insurers, where the company said, we've incurred all these losses, pay us. And the insurers said, no, this was maybe an act of war, so we don't have to pay you because it's covered under that exclusion. The whole pace of that has really accelerated. And what's happened with cyber insurance, and there is a point for this for you IT practitioners like me and Jason, why we're talking about this, even though it's not bits and bytes. Early on in the days of cyber insurance, it was very profitable, and insurers really wanted to get out there and build business quickly. So rates were low, coverage levels were high. And then you had, at the end of 2020, a group of insurance companies come to the US Congress here in the United States and ask, hey, please look at this because we're getting hammered by ransomware so much that our industry might fail. So here in the United States, the Government Accountability Office, GAO, did a survey at the first 4 months of 2021, and they documented that rates in 2020 went up 10 to 30%, and that the insurance industry was really stressed, and that the reserves that insurers had on hand might be insufficient to avoid them getting completely wiped out by another big round of ransomware attacks. And then the rest of 2021 happened. And we had reports in August of last year with the CEOs of major insurance companies saying, guys, we might not be able to do this anymore. This might not be viable. And the stat that I noticed back in August, 73% of the 73 cents on the dollar that they took in, they were turning around and paying right back out in claims, right, for ransomware.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier I'm from Texas. I live in the Dallas area. We're about 500 miles from the coastline. I can get flood insurance in Dallas. My friends down in Houston cannot get flood insurance, right? From a floodplain perspective, Houston gets flooded enough, or Corpus Christi or Galveston. You cannot buy, they will not sell you flood insurance in that area because it is so inevitable that you're going to get flooded in those areas. And when I look at these stats, Jeff, it almost seems like we're on that same precipice that literally there is no way for this industry to actually make money, which means that industry actually could fold. I mean, am I seeing too dire a scenario in this? The math just doesn't look right to me.
Well, in November, Lloyd's of London, which writes about through its consortium of companies that it works with, which is about 100. In November, it was reported that Lloyd's of London had told those 100 companies that are part of its large organization, part of its consortium, not to write cyber business in 2022. That's 20% of the world's cyber business by a name that I think most everyone knows that said, you got to limit this risk. There is grave doubt that within the industry itself and within government, that the cyber insurance business is going to keep being viable. Another thing that they reported actually at the same time in this November report, not only is Lloyd's recommending to organizations in its larger group, hey, you might want to ease out of this business. But if you can get cyber insurance, the maximum limits that you can get coverage for have gone down by 50%. So it used to be you could get top limit would be $10 million or in this report, 10 million pounds of coverage. Now the absolute maximum is 5 million pounds, right?
That's crazy to me. And also, let's be clear. A lot of times when you're talking about cyber insurance, what you're talking about is just cost of remediation. And we should spend a little time on that's not the most expensive part of what happens during a ransomware or a cyber event along the way. It almost always comes down more to lost downtime. And actually, you've got a slide for this, don't you? So in the DPR 2021, this is actually one of the very last times we'll show this data. In DPR 21, we actually did a survey, and one of the questions was around what are the impacts of downtime. Now, Jeff, I'm going to tease the folks at home because they don't get to see this yet, but we have finished the work for DPR 22, where we really double clicked on causes of outages. Certainly, cyber was near the very top on that list. What are the impacts of cyber attacks, et cetera? But even if you just look at last year's data, presume that cyber means ransom, and ransom means no access to data, and no access to data means downtime. Let's talk about how does that waterfall through the impacts of this, and then I'm going to ask you to tie that back to which of these items would cyber insurance actually have covered, if any?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you think about cybersecurity from just a general compliance perspective, it's a cost of doing business now, even if I'm not in a regulated business, because my customers, if I am a law firm, are going to turn around and say, before we give you confidential data for you to work on, you need to prove to us, you need to show us an audit that says you're not likely to have a data breach, or we're not going to have hundreds of hours of your work go up in a puff when someone encrypts it because you've got bad internal security controls. It's fine to talk about that, but then when you get down to brass tacks, what does it look like when you lose data? What does it look like when you have downtime? We got very clear answers from people in the survey last year. Our customers lose confidence in us. If we're a business that sells services to other businesses like a law firm, that's going to really matter, right? The corporations that we want to give us their confidential data so that we can work on their behalf are not going to do that if they think that data is at risk. There's obviously damage to brand integrity that's very closely related. I mean, this could drive you out of business. It has certainly done that for multiple customers. And I've got to also worry about not hiring. I work a lot, Jason, with public sector customers. And
Sure.
If you deal with state and local governments, they have a challenge hiring the IT folks that they need, right? Because typically those guys can go work at private corporations and make more. Right. So if I suddenly look like an unattractive employer, like I don't have my act together, then it's going to make it harder for me to hire the people that I need to keep doing a good job or to do a better job going forward. And then there's obviously legal action. There's the threat of direct reduction of stock price. And back to the idea of compliance, there's the idea that if I do have a breach or a significant outage, my regulator could turn around and look at me and say, wait, I thought you had your act together, but apparently not.
Yeah, when you look at the data, when Dave and I talked about this when it first came out, we kind of see three kind of adjacent bands that come out of this, right? So the first two, customer confidence and brand integrity, that's all about the external perception of the organization. The next two down, employee confidence, diversion of resources for projects internally. So now we have that internal perception of the organization. And the last three, let's just call this all the Monday morning armchair quarterbacks, all the folks that are second guessing after the fact. And that's when you get to stock price, legal action, accreditation along the way. Now this particular question was really just around downtime in general. Take out the words downtime, Jeff, and think about if you were to put in there, I notified people that I had a cyber attack, that data was either breached, it now maybe exposed, or, oh, by the way, I can't get to it. Any of those scenarios, and think about these same problems again. External perception of the organization, not trusted. Why would I put my data there? Internal perception. Why do I work for an organization that can't even protect the crown jewels, the data of the company? And then lastly, from the third parties, ID theft, lawsuits. It's a long list of things that all come off of this. So the same things we think about downtime, arguably are even more dire. We talk about if you had a cyber incident.
So I used to, there's the metaphor that I heard a long time ago from IT ops folks that the people who actually keep the servers and storage and network running are the people who can't run away when the light gets turned on, right? They have to actually stay there and get it and get things done. And you're very, very exposed in a cyber attack, which is why some organizations make the, in hindsight, grave mistake of not disclosing when they get hit with things like that. And it typically ends up costing them a very great deal more down the road. But it's not like, to your point earlier, a hurricane comes in and floods your data center. People can understand that's not your fault. You're only one of a large number of organizations and individuals affected by that. But a cyber attack is personal. You goofed in some way that let an adversary get on your network and compromise your data, right? It is a personal and embarrassing in a way that general natural disasters or even something like a fire in the building aren't. People can understand those. They're not as exposed, but a cyber attack is more, it's more embarrassing. It's more troublesome. The question, and to tie this back for folks who, like me and Jason, are IT practitioners that are watching this today, the reason why it's relevant to bring this up, and the reason that we decided to talk for 2 weeks about risk and compliance in the course of the Industry Insights talk, is that we're now very much at a point that things like immutable storage, things like going ahead and getting your ISO 27001 certification as an organization, for example, or your SOC 2 or whatever certification is relevant, are not IT conversations anymore. We're at a point where Veeam is hearing from our customers that the sales reps are going to their CFO and saying, look, you need to set aside money to make us ransomware proof. Otherwise, we can't sell anymore because we're getting asked in every deal, prove you're safe from ransomware. So the whole budget conversation is not like it was even 2 years ago.
Yeah, there's not much in IT that's what it was 2 years ago. All right. And on that very cheery thought, as I said, this is going to kind of actually wrap up last usage of the DPR 21 data. Starting next week, we're going to start a 4-part series. My usual partner in crime, Dave Russell, will be back with us, and we'll be doing 4 parts on data protection trends for 2022. The research was completed, week of Christmas, I think, was the last week that the field work was done. It takes about 6 weeks to publish that. So we're going to be marching towards the publish date for that. In the meantime, though, our colleagues, Jeff, Rick and Kirsten, they're going to be looking at monitoring storage. You mentioned earlier, we are infrastructure people. We are old school servers and disks and networks. Oh my! Rick and Kirsten are be going through that on the Friday Tech Bytes issue, and then it's on to DPR 22. Jeff, you cover this in a lot of detail, and thank you so much for the 2 weeks that you spent with us. If you were going to sit down with a CXO today, because I know you meet with a couple every week, when you sit down with a CXO, if you had your filter off and you could tell them one thing about regulatory compliance, it just doesn't come up in civil conversation, shake their shoulders, what would you tell them?
I've wanted to do that at times. When I hear people tell me, I will meet somebody and I'll hear them tell me about the 4-month rollout plan that they have for ransomware resilience. And you don't have 4 months. You don't have 4 months. You don't have 1 month. What organizations need to recognize is that as much of a pain as an audit might look like, you're being audited by bad guys every day. And you can either pass the audit or you can fail it. And it's odd to think that 2022, there are boards and execs that sort of have not gotten on board with that, but it's absolutely the case. So take a look at it, do something to make yourself safe.
That's a great thought. And I would finish with that, but I got to give props to Steve over on LinkedIn, who also made the comment seeing an uptick on cybersecurity as opposed to DR specialists. And I love that, because if you translate that back, I think what he's observing, I think we've seen the same thing, is when you're looking for DR specialists, you're looking for remediation. It's reactive. You know bad stuff's going to happen. How do you fix it? When you're looking for cybersecurity, you're looking proactive, not reactive. You're trying to avoid, not trying to recover. And unfortunately, that's where we find ourselves. So, Jeff, again, thanks for watching. For the folks at home, please feel free to continue to pile on your comments. We will answer them even after the thread, so we'll mark you so you can see that as well. Other than that, stay tuned on Friday for Rick and Kirsten, and then join me and Dave as we look at DPR 22 for all the month of February. On behalf of Veeam, thanks for watching.
Thanks all.